Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Sorry for the slight delay just at the beginning, just having a few quick technical difficulties. But yeah, welcome back to the most recent current installment of the Updates in Cooperative AI seminar series. So for those of you who haven't been before, this is our monthly seminar series where we try to take a bit of a zoomed out picture of the whole field with some big picture ideas, cutting edge results, and plenty of time for critical discussion as well. I'm very excited for this seminar in particular because I think the big picture ideas are going to really come through here nicely, and I know Manon has done loads of great thinking about this in the past as well. So yeah, that's basically it from me this time. If you are turning up to this seminar for the first time and you would like to hear about future seminars, then please just sign up via the mailing list. You can do so via the website here. And all the earlier seminars as well are recorded and put up on YouTube, as will this one. So I think that's basically it. Now let me move on to the main event, which is to introduce Manon. So Manon Revel is a senior research scientist at Google DeepMind. She builds mathematical and computational models for collective agency in a networked AI-mediated world. Her work brings together applied mathematics, AI, and political theory to design and analyze systems for collaborative decision-making. During her PhD at MIT, she developed new probabilistic frameworks for multi-agent decision-making with a particular focus on liquid democracy. Manon was an adjunct professor at Notre Dame University, a lecturer at MIT, and a democracy doctoral fellow at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance at the Harvard Kennedy School. She also led the research agenda on AI and democracy at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard Law School and worked at Meta's Fundamental AI Research Lab, FAIR, Palantir, the Responsible AI Institute, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and Bell Labs. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Manon, and I will stop sharing my slides and swap around. Thanks, Manon.
Thanks so much, Louis, for the introduction. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to share with you some of my recent work. Disclosure first, this is a work that I did while I was at Meta and at the Berkman Klein Center. You're not seeing the sharing mode, do you? Yeah, great. Okay, so it's a piece of work I've really enjoyed working on. Some of the context is this is a piece on AI enhanced deliberative democracy and the future of the collective will. I don't know what happened with, sorry, my title here. Apologies, we had a few hiccups this morning. To kind of zoom out a little bit and tell you a bit why I got really interested in this kind of problem. I've been interested in general in how we've been using math and statistics to model human decision making. As Louis was saying, this has been the big focus of my dissertation. And I became really interested in the new innovations that started spurring all around academia and industry about how we can use AI tools and AI models, LLM specifically, to represent what people want in the democratic context and use this to improve decision-making processes. And I was interested about this both at the mathematical level and what does it mean to have a good representation or a fair representation, and what it means to design a system that would have good mathematical guarantees. But I was also really interested in understanding how the systems interacted with how we've understood and built and designed democracy at the conceptual and philosophical level. So this work is a joint work with a good friend and colleague of mine, Théophile Pénigaud, who's a political philosopher, trained in classical political philosophy, and he's now between Yale as an associate research scholar and Sciences Po in France as a postdoctoral fellow. So the question we ask is, how are AI-facilitated collective judgments, so the representation of collective judgments with AI, inferred, and how should they be integrated into real-world decision-making? There are three main takeaways or things that I will go through over this talk. The first one is I want us to think about unpacking the hypothesis behind existing methods. And I'll go quite back in time. I'll really think of these AI methods to infer collective judgment as a historical continuation of polling, as I'll mention in a second. Then thinking about a frame rooted in political theory for democratic use. And here what we've been really interested in is trying to understand where the methods that are being introduced are a continuation of how we've thought about political theory in the past, and where there is a distinction. And then there's two ways when we think that there is a distinction. It's the way one is, should we update political theory? And the way two is, should we not try not to use these AI systems to replace current democratic institutions. And then I'll highlight some of the core features and empirical challenges of the concept that we introduced in this paper, which we call AI reflectors, and I'll tell you more about this in just a second. So I'll try to be relatively brief, because I really love to have a discussion. It's I think a topic that we're definitely co-creating as a research community, and so I'd be really curious to hear what you think about this kind of topics. And first, I'll cover how the interaction between social engineering and the political public sphere. And so, as I said, I'll start from a little history. So, we start the idea of having statistical framework for modeling the collective will with polling. Polling has been around for a while. I think in the US, people date the beginning of straw polling with the election of Andrew Jackson, who was the 7th president of the United States, so pretty early. But the first, I think, person who introduced statistical framework and mentioned that the samples were being representative because of stratified sampling was Dr. Gallup in the beginning of the 20th century. And he introduced stratified sampling and predicted the victory of FDR over half of London. And there's lots of excitement around how this could change the way in which we understood how humans and citizens were making decisions, and how this would become a new tool in better understanding the collective will and better understanding elections. There's this quote from Bernard Manon, who mentioned that the rise of the polls with the resurgence of the ideal of direct democracy accompanied the rise and growth of opinion polls, with the idea that if we could directly, cut to the meat and directly get to people's opinion, and only do it with a small sample and generalize, how could this change the way in which we do representation, and whether we would need less of it through more direct democracy thanks to polls. After this excitement, there was interesting, cycles that have been happening since then, which is that shortly after the polls were super wrong. In 48, the poll stations closed 3 weeks early, because it was so clear that Thomas Dewey would win the election against Truman. So everyone was like, this is a win game. The polls talked, statistics figured out that that is a done election. Some newspapers even printed a headline saying Dewey defeats Truman in advance. Although, as we all know, Truman became president of the United States and not Dewey. At the same time, shortly after, the computer scientists worked on actual machines that were also doing statistical polls. The UNIVAC-1 is the first machine doing so. It predicted Eisenhower's victory. And that was based on a really small sample, and had really good, was really close to reality in terms of not just who won, but also the proportion of by how much. The margin was extremely close to reality. And allegedly, this machine inspired Isaac Asimov to write a short story that is quite unknown, I found, but very fun, called Franchise. He wrote this in 1955. And the one-liner of Franchise is that you have a gigantic machine that can speak, that ingested everything humanity ever produced, and that can talk with humans. And because we have this gigantic machine that knows everything about humanity, everything humanity ever wrote, we don't need to go through elections anymore. In Franchise, the machine selects a citizen in the country every year, has a 2 or 3 hour discussion with the citizen, and then select a president based on this discussion. And I think the machine, which he calls the multivac, as a tribute to the UNIVAC, is quite similar to what we're seeing today, although he was quite early again. And just an interesting thought experiment of what if there were other kind of systems of governance, if we had a system that had a more holistic view of humanity than what every single collection of humans we can create has. Okay, fast forward about 50 years. And now we are going into this idea of deliberative polling, which has been an update on polling. Lots of the complaints about polling was that you have a very constrained set of questions. You can think of most polling are this kind of constrained multi-choice questions, and humans don't really think in a multiple choice question way. So you have lots of questions about now when you have polls, how do you aggregate results? But the question is really, is this the best way to get to the collective judgments? Is this really the best way to access what people think and feel and want and their changes in opinion, a thing like this? And so deliberative polling was introduced by James Fishkin at the end of the 20th century, still very active today. There is a deliberative Stanford Deliberation Lab that's working extensively on this platform, still very active. The way it works is simple. You start with standard polling. Then, 1936 was old polling. Deliberative polling is you start with a standard polling, then you have a deliberation. So people will go and discuss about the questions that they were asked to answer in the first phase, and then they vote again on the polls. And the idea here is that the data that you gather is one of opinion change. You also get transcript data, so you get more information about what made people change their opinion. But the idea mainly is that what you get after the deliberation is a more informed opinion. Yeah. Now, so that was for the first, perspective on how we've thought about collective judgments and statistical methods to infer the collective will has been through different kinds of polling. Now, if we keep going into looking at how things unfold, this idea that we were not really meant to think in multiple choice question was quite prevalent. And with the rise of NLP, people have been starting to think, how about it? Could we actually just start having much richer ecosystem of thoughts and proposals and discussions? And then can we go from there instead of going from these constrained questionnaires? The really hard question in the early 2000s for using raw text, free-form text, is that we didn't really have a good aggregation method. How do you create anything out of this all huge corpus of raw text? So what people have used have been these latent methods, which are very similar to what you have in a recommender system. In a recommender system, you have comments, which are raw text, and then you have votes on these comments. And you have this interaction matrix where you can gather who likes what comment. And so in a sense, we're back to really discretizing the space of opinions and on discretizing, all of this space of free-form text that is being gathered, but that helps you start from the raw thoughts, not constrain them with an a priori frame, and gather feedback on what people think based on this. And then you have different ways of basically learning how to represent the comments and the humans in order to select, for instance, comments that happen to be more representative or more liked, or you have different kinds of metrics that you may want to satisfy. But the main idea here is that you use this interaction matrix that in some part of the literature on deliberative democracy and AI, people call the opinion matrix or the will matrix, although I don't like the will matrix term so much. But it's kind of this idea where is this a way to now encode in a new fashion people's opinion by just selecting their pluses or minuses, like I dislike, on the free-form text that is being created. A very, I think, popular method in our community has been to think from the perspective of, can we have bridging aggregation? So while in recommender system, you might want to maximize engagement, in the AI and democracy world, what you might be trying to identify is these posts whose latent dimensions happen to span groups that otherwise disagree greatly. All right. So this is the term that Aviv Ovadia has coined is the collective response systems, which is the platforms that I'm thinking that have been mainly using these latent methods. This is Polis, that was created by Colin McGill, and Ramesh by Andrew Konya have been two platforms that's been precisely having users writing free-form thoughts and aggregating them through other users voting on these free-form thoughts. So that was stage 2. We had stage 1 was polling, stage 2 was the latent methods. And now, obviously, I told you the issue with the latent methods was that it was the reason why we use latent methods and we use this latent representation of users and comments was that we didn't have a tool or we didn't have any reliable machine that could take the freeform text and output something. But that completely changed in 2022. Some tools became widely available that could process open-ended text and output open-ended text. And that widely, that was, to me, that's the thing I found most exciting is how now we can start processing a huge amount of freeform text, which was prior to this innovation completely impossible for our field. Oops, sorry, I forgot to show you. This was my slide about Polis and Ramesh. Community notes is another example that uses this latent methods to aggregate freeform text. Yeah. So as I mentioned, now we have this kind of new huge breakthrough where you can take all of the comments that were written by people, use an LLM to write a new statement. The way in which it's been okay, so now I'm entering the realm of things like maybe you've heard the Habermas Machine or computational social choice, where it's kind of an in-between. Oh, I think I did. Sorry. Okay, I think I lost one computer, but okay, let me continue. Please let me know if there is any issue. So in the Habermas machine or computational social choice, the main difference is that now you have a tool that can process open-ended text and free-form text, but they still rely on something of a latent method. It's not fully just using an AI to process all of the text. And the reason for that is because they first generate candidate statements, which are generated by AIs, and then they still infer the human preferences over these AI written statements. So you still have as an intermediate step this interaction matrix, this will matrix that is being computed. And the reason for this is because it's a huge leap of faith to think I just give it freeform statement and I get an output statement and I'm going to call this a legitimate output. That's a pretty, at this stage, we trust very much these systems in many ways, but we are also warned that we should not trust them that much in many ways. And I think people are still hesitant to make this leap of faith. So to keep some amount of interpretability, what people have done is they've reconstructed in the middle this will matrix. What's interesting is that most of the time, this will matrix is also inferred using LLMs. So it's not clear to me that we are fully, we're not doing the leap of faith. We're making it in two steps. And maybe we can verify the middle step more because we could benchmark it against real world data. But to me, it's a really interesting question whether how much legitimacy this adds versus how much complexity it adds. And in the generative social choice paper, for instance, they do benchmark their method against directly outputting one statement without the machinery behind it that's reconstructing these will matrices, and find that even though the more complex method has a slight gain, it's not huge. So I think there's a real question about legitimacy and interpretability and what would socialize better, something that's simpler, but is really trusting entirely a black box, or something that trusts a black box twice, but still has this kind of interpretable step in the middle. So as I mentioned, this is the work from the generative social choice folks and the Habermas Machine, which are really cool paper that I think to me really embody this idea that now we have a new way of processing this kind of information, which opens a whole bunch of new opportunities for the AI and democracy field. And they propose, I think, really neat ideas. The first one rooted in social choice and theoretical work that spurs as well throughout this paper, and in the latter, in the Habermas Machine, a very, I think, well-engineered LLM-based system. Okay, so just an overview of what I was mentioning right now. The first thing that we decompose in this paper is the kind of three, historical stages in the last century into how people have tried to represent what people think, and if the collective will, if you will. So first is polling methods, where you have elicitation is very simple. You just have a bunch of questions, and people just say yes or no to different questions, and then you have aggregation, Most of the time, aggregation is just a histogram. You can do some more fancy aggregations if you'd like, but it's very simple. Common critique to this is that people don't think in a multiple choice question, and this limits the expression of what society has to say. And so people moved towards having free-form inputs, with the big question of how now do you do aggregation of free-form inputs, which leads to the introduction of what some people have called the wheel matrix, which is interaction matrix of us learning what kind of comments people like, and using this wheel matrix to then identify slate of oftentimes human written statements that are now aggregated over the inferred or identified wheel matrix. And in our case, people use bridging criterion. Again, these methods very common across the board, not just in the AI and democracy space. And now we have the kind of LLM latent methods, which is step 3, which uses LLM to take free-form text as an input and output free-form text. But there is still this in-between step that infers wheel matrices so that we keep some amount of interpretability. Okay. Let me proceed to my second point, which is about the democratic credentials of AI-facilitated collective judgments. So here, what I'm trying to get at is with the research that we did, trying to understand what lineage the the LLM latent methods were inherited from, we tried to understand how these kind of methods have been typically used. And there've been proposals for using AI systems to model citizen assemblies and to kind of simulate how humans could make decisions. And some have been as far as to suggest that we could use these AI systems directly as a representative to make decisions in lieu of people. And it's something that we've been interested in studying and understanding better. Okay, so just a little bit of background here on what we discuss in the paper. So we call the calculability hypothesis the idea that preference exists independently as standalone realities or latent variables. And then the only question is how to best compute those preferences to obtain a representative outcome. And we believe that there's lots of issues with this calculability hypothesis, which would be necessary to use AI systems in any binding fashion in decision-making processes. And the reason why we believe that this hypothesis is flawed is because of the core indeterminacy of the collective will. Indeterminacy at 3 levels. First, at the empirical level, at the aggregative level, and at the normative level. So if I start from the normative level, there's this piece, and I think the word indeterminacy of the collective will specifically come from a French historian and sociologist called Pierre Rosanvallon, who discusses the fact precisely that the collective will is nothing very, there's not like this thing floating around in the world that is the people's will that we just have to identify and then entirely, spread throughout the world. The whole process of finding the collective will is one of co-creation, is one where we learn together and we discuss together, and we there is it's so process dependent that there is not this deus ex machina thing that exists that can be constructed independently of the process of people opting in and legitimizing a decision and feeling heard and feeling part of the process. So that's at the first level. At the second level, the aggregative indeterminacy, by this we mean that very known problem for social choice theorists. You can have the same aggregation matrix, the same will matrix, the same opinion matrix, and get very different outputs depending on the method that you use. So there is also a core issue in the calculability hypothesis is that even if you were to identify the preferences perfectly, you have a big question about what is the good way to aggregate it. And then the empirical indeterminacy is that this very question of identifying the perfect preferences is not very clear. We know that preferences change a lot. We have lots of empirical evidence about how our preferences change depending on extrinsic factors, intrinsic factors, lots of different things that mean that we're quite resistant to this idea of the calculability hypothesis because of this 3-layered indeterminacy of the collective will. So 2 more pieces of backgrounds. The first one about representation. So we've been really interested in some debates during the years we're working on this paper about whether we could use AI systems as AI as representative to make decisions on behalf of humans. And so a bit of our kind of background thinking here was that there is a bit of a conundrum, because if you say that our democratic institutions, representative democratic institution, must track the people's will, while also claiming that the collective will is indeterminate, which means it can never be fully located, then how can you kind of reconcile both of these things? And the answer in the literature and political philosophy is that representation is this very dynamic and future-oriented and kind of co-creation process. Representation kind of functions as a mirror. It's and the representative specifically are not just the people who know the will; they're a medium through which the people continually reflect on and reconsider the identity. It's a very very dynamic process that helps people constantly refine what they think and what they want and what they will, and so on and so forth. That's just one word on representation. I also want to say one word on deliberation, which is something that people in this crowd might have heard a lot. So, deliberation has been around for a little while, and it's the big resurgence of the deliberation theory and democratic theory is attributed to Habermas, who's been discussing how you can have kind of two contexts, two spheres in society, in the citizenry. And the piece that I'm really interested in here is how he talks about the context of discovery and the context of justification, which is the context of justification is where you have formal institutions that serve as context of justification that convert the public opinion into binding decisions through this process of representation that's ever evolving and very dynamic. And then you have the unregulated public sphere, which is it's the context of discovery. It's where you have debates and when you have opinion formation. And based on Habermas' work, we can have in mind that these two moments are extremely important, the moment of discovery and the moment of justification. And in our mind, we've been thinking of the AI-powered deliberative tools really as additional discovery tools. The quote from here is to mobilize and pull the relevant issues and record information. This is a quote from Habermas. And we are really interested in how we can use AI tools to empower citizens to be more agentic on this Habermasian second track, the track of discovery. And just to really hone in on this slightly more, I think that back to the question of the black box and the justification that we need to make certain decisions with AI systems, the problem of legitimacy would be huge if we were to make any binding question, which is the realm of the justification context. So I think we have great, for now at least, we're not very keen on having AI systems making binding decisions at the political level for us anytime soon. We also, think in the realm of democratic innovations in general that we have great institutions in many ways, and we have to think how they complement one another, not replace each other. I might be speaking to a crowd that's already completely convinced. It really depends on how far people want to go with integrating AI in society. But really, this idea of context of discovery is really important for us, in that for us to make society and for us to make decisions collectively, there is a great need for us to understanding each other better and being able to have this kind of, both serendipitous and organized debates throughout society. And so we're really excited about the opportunity for AI tools to improve on this reflective, really, function of democracy, which is that of the context of discovery, that help a group to better understand where it is, what it thinks, what are the things, and better help translate and spread and share ideas and information at a big scale. Okay, so I'll wrap up with a few words about AI reflectors. So what I'm getting at with this whole discussion is that we're really interested in this line of work that's been trying to get a better sense of what people think by not only getting their opinion on constrained multiple choice question, but getting their raw thoughts and helping aggregate this raw thoughts. And we also really anchor the role of these kind of systems as in the reflective moment, as a tool to help the community better understand itself. and to be better prepared to then go into making justification and formal representation and binding decision. But we think that there is a really big opportunity for collective sense making that's not binding, that's really recreating common understanding and knowledge and sharing of information with these AI systems. And it's really where we anchor the role of these systems, and it's why we call them AI reflectors, really acting as mirrors and reflection of communities. And I think the proposal is fairly simple. There are two things we're really excited about AI reflectors, two functionalities. One that we think is already quite developed in the systems I mentioned, and one which is less so, which is the one we've been working on mainly. So the first one is the idea of reflective elicitation. So, I mentioned to you that deliberative polling was introduced because they thought that not only getting this, checks on boxes was too constrained of a way to get people's opinion, but also it's a very instinctive way of answering questions. And that most of the time, because our opinion change, it's good to have a deliberative moment. In the deliberative polling world, this deliberative moment happens as a little group. It's also been argued in the literature. There's a great article called Deliberation Within, where you can have this kind of almost introspective moment where before entering a debate space or a discussion, you just take a second privately to reflect on what you think in the context of what other thing. So this is what we call reflective elicitation, and we think that LLMs have a great opportunity to allow for more reflective elicitation where human can privately write open-ended answers to open-ended question, and they can prompt the LLM to reflect on their thoughts. The LLM can provide experiences, testimonies, argument, contradictory facts as needed or requested before, providing an actual opinion. Then the second stage is the synthesis generation or the aggregation, where the LLM generates the inclusive collective judgment based on the reflective open-ended thoughts that were collected just above. In the methods I presented, you have the inference of these wheel matrices. I think there are many ways in which we can think about iterating on these things, but we think that these two components are being quite important for us to get better statistical representation of collective judgments and collective will if we were to go the route of using open-ended statements as inputs and as outputs as well. Here is a link to the paper if you're interested, and I look forward to the discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Manon.
Sorry. Louis, sorry, I forgot my favorite quote ever. I need to.
Apologies. Over to you for the favorite quote. Sorry.
It's my fault. It's my fault. This is my absolute favorite quote. It's the epigraph of our paper. Let me read it. And indeed, well, if one day they really find the formula for all our wanting and caprices, that is, what they depend on, by precisely what law they occur, precisely how they spread, what they strive for, in such and such case, and so on and so forth. Well, that is, if they find a real mathematical formula, then perhaps man will immediately stop wanting. For who wants to want, according to a little table? That's Dostoevsky, and that's 1864. But I find it quite current in some ways.
Yeah, no, that was great. Very prescient and a nice thing to end on. Cool, fantastic. Thank you so much. I saw lots of little kind of like applause, kind of like things going up just at the end of the talk there. So yeah. One thing I didn't mention at the beginning of the call, which I should have done, is just a tiny bit about the format. So now we'll have the rest of the conversation for discussion. And if you have questions, please enter them using the Q&A function. So you'll see down at the bottom of the Zoom screen, there's a button that says Q&A. If you click on that, then you can both ask questions and also upvote existing questions. So even if you don't have some of your own, if you see another one that you'd like to be prioritized, then please upvote those. I will moderate the Q&A just to keep an eye on the questions and make sure we're kind of getting through them at a reasonable rate and in the right order. But if it's possible for you to unmute and ask your question, then I will call on you to do so. And if not, because say you're in a library or your microphone's broken or something like that, then I'll just read the question out. So I'll give you a few moments to do that. Cool. Okay, so that's my housekeeping that I forgot to do before. First question on the Q&A at the moment is from Chris Santos Lang. Chris, if you can unmute, then go for it, and if not, I'll read it out.
Sure. So my question is the collective will a hill climber that gets stuck at local maxima, or do the rare prophets in a collective have some way to overcome conservative perspectives without building a warring, distinct, radical collective? Just, what is this collective will thing? Is it this hill climber?
Can you specify what you mean by hill climber?
So a hill climber can get stuck at local maxima because it tries to get to something that's higher. But it might not be the highest peak because it can go to whatever is the most adjacent highest area. And that means there's this danger of getting kind of stuck in, do we expect that if societies care about their collective will and they're divided that way, are they going to get stuck? Or is there some way that they wouldn't get stuck? And if there is some way, what would that way be?
I see. It's an interesting question, and it reminds me of lots of the discussions we've had with Théophile. And one of the great joy for me of working with a philosopher has been to hear him tell me so often that we had to kind of not use the optimization language or mindset into thinking about the democracy world. He's been very, I think it's been a really interesting way of understanding how, other disciplines, and specifically what I'm really interested in trying to be really humble about entering this the world of philosophy specifically is that it's been around for longer than math and longer than machine learning and so I'm really trying to understand where there might, how the concept were constructed. So I'm trying to weigh on these discussions that we had with my answer here, thinking that the we often decompose decisions or process or things, saying it's both about whether the process is intrinsically good, and if you care about the process, you don't really care about whether or not it's epistemically grounded, or if it's good or bad, like if it's local maximum or a local minimum, like if it's stuck somewhere or not stuck somewhere. And at the same time, it is of course true that there are situations that are better than others. But it's kind of it's this annoying world where we both have to think that there exists conditions that are better than others, and we need to strive for them, but also they are not defined a priori, and we can't define the collective will optimal as saying this is where we have to land, and until we're not there, there is a problem. So it's, to me, it's kind of the way I think about it, but with potential limitations, is that there is a bit of this, the zone of inquiry, the zone of, there is like a big space of things that are fully legitimate and we need to explore, and then there are things that are really out of bounds, and we need our systems to make sure that we don't get in this kind of very, 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 very suboptimal extremes. But everything that's in the middle is much less about optimality and much more about the co-creation of sense making, of understanding. And sometimes maybe it's much better to have something that, for some reason, by some alien looking at the earth, may sound slightly less optimal than something else, but where you have a really strong collective sense making and collective and common sense of legitimacy. So it's kind of how I think about it. Like, the boundaries do exist. I would not argue against that, but then within these boundaries, it's much less about what's optimal or which like configurations we want to avoid, and much more about how do we enter this process of collective creation and common grounding and sense making of understanding of one another, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds like it might be a hill climber, and we just don't worry about that. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it means in this middle ground where things are legitimate. I would say it's not hill climber. And maybe some people in the group or some external observer could say they could have reasons to believe something is better than the other, but there is such a competition in these objectives that I would refrain from the idea that everything that's in this zone of inquiry is a hill climber. What I understand.
Thanks.
Thanks for your question.
Okay, great, thanks. Next person on my list is a question from Oscar.
Hello. So when you're talking about reflective elicitation, I think you're saying that sometimes the LLMs should give contradictory or counterpoints to the human. So my assumption is that most people won't proactively ask for these contradictory perspectives, and like, should we kind of force it on them anyway, or should the AI kind of only give what the human wants?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to the question. I think that this is it's part of the research agenda for us to try to understand what makes a good reflective step. And as you mentioned, some of our ideas is provide counterpoints if the people ask for it. But I think there are many design questions that for us have to be explored. And maybe to add on this, the way in which we think about a reflective step is a moment where you can think of your opinion in the context of that of others. It doesn't mean you have to change your mind. It doesn't mean you have to, start thinking like someone else. But I just being aware that there is this other opinion. Again, the point is not for you to go there, but just awareness, I think, of other perspective. And this also is an active research area in the context of social media. People have studied the backfiring effect of showing counter-attitudinal news. So it's not a fully solved problem, but we think that there's something really important with reflective opinions and exposure in general to. But then the question is, how do you do it right? It's a very hard question, and I think it's an empirical one that we didn't solve. So if you're interested, I'd love to hear your thoughts or research on that.
Cool. Well, great. Thanks. Next question on the list is from Artem.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation, Manon. My question is about cross-pollination. I think it's one of the most interesting opportunities that AI unlocks, and I wonder if this is something that you've been interested in. Like, what if millions of people could asynchronously cross-pollinate using AI as facilitator, and what are the failure modes in this process, in your opinion?
And so, and hi, Artem, nice to see you. And to be sure, by cross-pollination, do you mean having many people all across, for instance, a country that all of a sudden can communicate through this system?
Yes, when AI is asking you what you think about someone else's opinion or a cluster of opinions, and there could be it's whole design space, like how exactly to do this, and ThinkScape is one of many implementations, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think that's also something that's quite at the heart of things like polis or image, which is this idea of how can you cross-pollinate and have people who would not see each other otherwise at least see an opinion or a piece of information that was mentioned on the other corner of the internet on this kind of platform. So on this, I think they're great scaling opportunities, obviously. I'm also very mindful of what some of my colleagues, specifically in the empirical world, have said. A friend of mine, Claudia Schwalitz, who's the head of Democracy Next, is very careful with scaling things too much, because I think that she used huge value in in-person deliberation as being maybe the most transformative element. And so something I think I said in passing during the talk, but I really want to anchor again here, is that we're obviously not thinking of any of these tools as all of a sudden taking over and being the silver bullet that solves all our problem with deliberation or collective sense making. We really think of these as complementary pockets of systems and institutions that we can build to enhance and strengthen our discussion muscles. So I think my answer is yes, and yes, I think there are great opportunities to discover new ways of having collected discussions, and I think that's nice. And also, we've learned many things from the offline world for decades and decades and decades. And I think something I've heard both in social sciences, like theoreticians, like my colleague, and empirical people on the ground, is that they're a big piece sometimes as the solutionist mindset of AI people that come and say, we have it all solved and we'll figure it out. I think we have to stay really, really humble and really grounded with what they've done and what they've known and what they've learned, which I think is extremely valuable, and we should make sure we don't lose this expertise and understanding in the very fast-moving world of AI.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
We've still got loads of questions coming in, so yeah, I'll keep it going. And next one on the top of the list is from Andre.
I cannot start audio or audio video. I don't know if it's okay.
Yeah, it's all good. Go for it.
Okay, so thank you very much for the talk. It was very thought-provoking for me. I'm not really Okay, there is a huge history of pooling in US. I know it's not like that in the other countries. So what do you think about pooling as a tool for manipulating people? Because it's used like that in many countries, because as designed, because of privacy, it's not transparent. And you can organizers and LLMs by itself may manipulate data and present what they want. So it's may discourage, and it does discourage in many parts of the world, one part of the people not to do anything. So what do you think about this thing, this idea? I don't know, thought.
Thanks, Andre. It's also a very thought-provoking question. So I think I'll answer in two ways or two steps. The one thing we discuss in the paper is also some of the framing issues or potential manipulation issues of polling. And I think we're not having in mind the context you're mentioning. We're having in mind a context where just you can frame a question a certain way. You can just there's so much heterogeneity in the answers you can get based on how you frame a question or which options you add. And it's something that's been also greatly studied and has been part of this empirical, or I don't know if you think of it as empirical, or I think, yeah, it's empirical indeterminacy, is the fact that it's very hard. It's not even defined what's what is this individual or collective will. And so, of course, you can get your way around things with poll design. I think at the question of whether someone would either actively use polls as for surveillance or manipulation directly, and whether or not LLMs are an issue there, I think absolutely these are not solved problems. We do have many open questions about how we handle the data in a way that's private, and I think that's even a bigger problem. It's even a harder problem with LLMs currently than it is with polls, I would say. I don't have I don't know the answer to how do we do it securely. My mindset for thinking about lots of this innovation in the in this kind of technology world and integration between technology and society is that all of the opportunities comes with risk, and we should work on both at the same time. I think I don't like it's going to solve everything and let's go for it. I also don't like there are these problems, hence let's not do it, because I think we should do things and at the same time work on the risk, and not think we can't do something because there is a risk, and not just think let's do it and the world will figure it out because tech is great. So I don't have the answer to your question, but I've been trying to that's the mindset we try to also instill in the paper, of trying to be as clear as we can, and we love feedback and critiques on this, on what are the risks of the things we're proposing and how we have to think about them while we build the tools that we're proposing.
Can I make a short comment on that? Liz? So
Sure.
I think that one mindset you should keep in mind that like 90%, 95% of people live under autocracies in the world, and then you develop some technique. You should think how it can be misused by other regimes, because okay, you have like all the things nicely working in democracy, but then you produce some tools how they can misuse by other government to make a better control of the populations. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I'd love to read more about this. If there's anything you'd recommend for us to read.
2 minutes left for questions. I know Manon has to leave on the dot, so we can try and get through these swiftly. We've got one at the top at the moment from Emin, if you want to unmute and ask the question.
Yeah, hi. Hey Manon, thanks for the great talk. Yeah, I had a question about like how there's a work on how language models, like many other tools, can reinforce existing or even outdated biases or stereotypes about certain groups within society, whether intentional or unintentional. And so when using AI reflectors, how can we ensure that they in fact reflect the opinions of different parts of society and not just the dominant group's perceptions or beliefs of how others feel or believe?
Hey, I mean, yeah, that's a great question as well. And I think in a similar fashion to Andre's question, it's we talk at length about this in the paper, as well as something we have to be worried about while we build this kind of tools. I think I don't know the whole extent of the empirical research on how you ensure this. Some of the work I've done when at Meta was about how do we have more representative RLHF steps where we allow to have the system being trained on a more comprehensive set of values. I think there is, you have some options in the training phases and the pre-training phases and the retraining phases. At the prompting level, I would say that the one thing I found really interesting in the generative social choice approach is that it relies on this idea of justified representation, which is, it very quickly, the idea of justified representation is similar to proportional representation. Of course, if you have a very, if you have 100 people and you can only represent 5 opinions, if you have a bunch of tiny groups, you will not be able to represent all of the groups proportionally. But so justified representation is kind of the next best thing you can always achieve, which is saying if you have a group that's of size at least 100/5, then these groups really deserve representation because it's a k, where k is the number of statements that you can include of the whole group. And so I think that there is really interesting ongoing research, both theoretically and empirically, that try to get at this question of how do you make sure that you have something that's representative. I don't think any method will be fully foolproof. And so I think it's, as for the privacy risk that Andrea was mentioning, I think it's something that we have to constantly think about and monitor while we make this progress.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, great. I think we might have time for just maybe 1 or maybe 2 more questions. So the next one on the top of the list is from an anonymous person, so I'll just read it out, which is, what do you think are the biggest barriers to adoption for the sorts of AI tools for democracy that you described in the talk? So is it technical shortcomings, people's suspicion of these tools and systems, institutional momentum, something else?
That's a really good question. And I feel it could also be a nice question for a Cooperative AI Foundation. I feel you guys have been doing great work in this, or at least thinking about this. That's a great question. So now I'm thinking kind of an analogy with things like sortition. I also saw there was a question in passing about sortition and empirically validated methods. Which I think there are also lots of research about, anyway, but I think I'm a big fan. I think there are great opportunities with sortition. I think that lots of the with sortition specifically, my understanding is that it's just very hard to change how people have done things, and you have lots of vested interests in the bunch of pockets, and it's kind of scary to change things drastically. So I think I would. Okay, my answer is not scientific. I've not done research about this, and I might be wrong. But I think I would assume that the barriers are much more social than they are technical somehow. But I might change my mind if I think more about it.
Okay, cool. Thanks. There's I don't know, interesting answer. And yeah, I was glad that question made it to the top of the poll in the end, because I kind of wanted to know the answer. We've got 2 minutes left. I think we can try and squeeze in one if possible, which is just maybe something you could leave us with. Are there any concrete applications, domains, or specific tools you feel especially excited about? Relatedly, what would you like to see more people working on?
Cool. Yeah. I've been really excited about this, big space of experimentation with things like, as I mentioned, I think Habermas Machine and generative social choice for me opened up new space of ideas I had never thought about. So I've been really excited and grateful for kind of how I think it was these 2 very thought-provoking pieces. I'm really interested in this reflective step. I'm really interested in recreating common sense in societies that tend to be more fragmented, and how do we? And I think I didn't fully pin how the solution should look like, whether it's a bunch of personalized tools that make you be more aware, or I don't know, more open-minded, or whether it's a big collective moment, whether it's a big sortition event. I'm French, and we've been having really interesting citizen assemblies going on in France. We had 3 in the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, which are other kinds of social innovations or technology. I mean, I don't know, it's not like AI innovation, but I think it's very interesting democratic innovations. I think again, I don't know if it's the most satisfactory answer. I think we're at a stage where we're exploring lots of things, and it's not clear yet. Many things have great merits theoretically. And I think understanding what has an empirical impact is a very important question. And I feel we're still at this stage where we're making these trial and errors. And so maybe I want to see more trials and errors. I want to see more of us being very innovative and thinking out of the box and being ambitious with the kind of tools and impacts we want to design.
Okay, fantastic. I think that's a great place to end, kind of rallying cry to maybe people in the call and people who will be watching this in future. Thank you again so much for the wonderful talk. And yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in and for all the great questions. Looking forward to seeing you here at the next one. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Lewis. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thanks, Manon.